This is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culchin Ford. Bird Culchin Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
And welcome into a brand new edition of the Bearcast on SicEm365.com on this Tuesday, April the 9th, a stormy day in Waco, but a busy week to recap and to unpack and, well, some big topics to discuss as the basketball season has officially come to a close. UConn, you're defending back-to-back, now reigning men's national champions in basketball with their win last night over Purdue. College basketball comes to a close, and of course you've got the South Carolina women capping off their historic season as well on Sunday. So South Carolina, your women's champions, UConn, your men's champions, and basketball talk is going to be a big part of what we discuss today, because as a result of an unexpected move, appears, at least in the college basketball ranks, Waco, Texas, and Baylor basketball is back in the crosshairs of the media spotlight right now, and we will get into all of that. Also, spring football continues on as well as they enter the final couple of weeks before the annual green and gold game at McLean Stadium, and hopefully they have better weather than what's going on today, because we have seen spring games rained out. That would be a situation like what we've got today, but man, it's a spring. We've got basketball season now behind us, but a lot of basketball to talk, as I mentioned, and some football. So that's going to kind of cover what we do this week. But I'm Craig Smoak, SicEm365.com writer, also 365 sports host, joined as always by Grayson Grundhoefer of SicEm365.com, and a Purdue fan who couldn't have been too happy to see how events unfolded last night, given your family connections.
Yeah. I mean, it was really tough to see them, lose that game. I think going into it, you kind of felt like, we all pretty much knew UConn was the better team. It was just one of those things. Could Purdue just have a crazy performance? Could Zach Edey have a crazy performance? Which, he ended up having a great game. But as a team, they were just no match. I mean, UConn just too physical at the guard spot, too long, too athletic. They're really, really good. And you're going to have all the conversations about, are they the greatest team of all time? Because we do that nowadays. Every time someone wins, it's like, this and that. Are they the best of all time? But that team is dang good. And they have a lot of really good players. They have NBA players as well. And ultimately, they were just too much for Purdue. So really tough to see for my family. But I will say, this was a really cool year for them, and one that I know they're never going to forget. First Final Four since 1980. It's been a long time. So, yeah, tough one to watch last night. But I think ultimately, coming off of it, it also kind of got me thinking about, the Final Four being in San Antonio next year, a pretty good opportunity, for Baylor to potentially get back and play somewhere that is very, known territory. But obviously, that's not really what we're going to be talking about today when it comes to the Bears, because of the Kentucky job that you mentioned came open.
The Kentucky job comes open, and we'll get into that. But the basketball season comes to a close, and you think it's going to be a little quiet, and then because of that job, here we are. But first things first, if you are watching this live, the Baylor Athletics on SicEm365 YouTube page, please, if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe. You're listening after the fact on whatever platform it is that you use, iTunes or Spotify. If you could do the same, hit that subscribe button or that like button or 5-star rating, whatever you feel like doing. We appreciate the support, and just that goes a long way for us. So if you could do that, we'd be quite thankful for your listening first and foremost, but for also doing that for us as well. So with that out of the way, let's dive into that Kentucky job that opens up and now has any talk about Baylor's team next season completely in limbo, because there's no point in talking about it until we know for sure what the head coaching situation is going to look like. So just weeks removed from the Louisville job being open and being a much bandied about topic when it came to who they would hire as their head coach, Scott Drew was mentioned throughout as a strong candidate. You could be led to believe that he turned down the job, was one of various names that were mentioned, but he was a pretty hot and heavy name there for a while. Doesn't sound like it ever got too close. Ultimately, he elects to stay at Baylor, and that's that. Until this past weekend when, seemingly out of the blue, John Calipari is reported to have taken the job at Arkansas, staying within the SEC, but basically resetting his clock, his hot seat, starting back at zero by just going simply to a new job rather than coming back to the high-pressure seat in Kentucky where it's starting to get a little warm because they have not had much postseason success despite having the thickest group of talent that anybody has in college basketball on a year-to-year basis. They're not winning the way that Kentucky fans want them to win, and so it started to get a little uncomfortable maybe in some cases. Not that they were going to force him out, but things didn't change here pretty soon. They might force him out because it's been a little while since they've raised that trophy. So with that as the background, it's not entirely shocking, but it's still shocking that this report came out that he would be the next head coach at Arkansas, just moving over on the map a little bit towards the west and staying within the SEC, but resetting that clock at zero, like I said. It makes a lot of sense from his standpoint. At the same time, it's still stunning to just leave a Kentucky for an Arkansas. And so that's where we think we are right now. But the situation as we record this at 11:20 on Central Time on a Tuesday is that he has yet to publicly say anything. He was confronted by a local TV station while he was walking the dog and had a no comment, basically. And then since then, there's been Kentucky reporters like Matt Jones, who's probably as good as it gets when it comes to the Kentucky beat. And he's, been throwing a lot out there. But so far, John Calipari has not announced that he's going to Arkansas. And there's who knows how many fights or, I guess, talks going on behind the scenes and contractual issues that make him maybe not have the ability to say that just yet. Like, it sounds as though it's inevitable, but there are things still being worked out, and that's why we haven't heard anything officially. But all signs point to John Calipari has taken the job at Arkansas. It's only a matter of time. Today, by the time you listen to this, it could become official, Grayson. So that's what's in the air. And as a result, that Kentucky job looks like it's going to be open. And what we've seen in just the 24 hours, 48 hours now, I guess it's been since, we've seen several coaches go ahead and say, I'm not interested. Nate Oates at Alabama puts out a statement on Twitter. He's not going anywhere. He's going to be at Alabama. And Danny Hurley, after winning his second consecutive championship last night at UConn, lets it be known, the wife's not going to let me go anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. Why would you go anywhere? You just won back-to-back national championships. Kentucky job being what it is or not, UConn's right there with it and actually has had more success in recent years. So it makes sense that he wouldn't be interested in that job. There's other names being floated around, but what it's all boiled down to, with Oates out, Hurley out, and others seemingly out, although they're going to potentially talk to Billy Donovan of the NBA and check some other boxes, a lot of arrows point at Scott Drew as being the logical candidate and perhaps at this point the favorite. We've heard nothing from Drew's side of things because why would you at this point unless he was going to come out with his own Nate Oates-like statement, which Baylor fans would be thrilled to see of, hey, I'm not going anywhere, but that's not happened. So it's just right now basically silence. We've got various reports, Ashley Hodge and company, checking with their sources, providing updates over on the website. It's a good time to be a premium member if you're not already signed up to Sikkim365.com because of Ashley's insight, Kendall, among various others who are chiming in on this. There's reason for optimism that he's going to continue to be the man at Baylor, but this is also a very real threat. This is much more than just Louisville coming at you. This is the Alabama of college basketball coming at you. And with every weapon imaginable when it comes to NIL, money, fan support, history, everything you can imagine. But there is the fact that he is Mr. Baylor, and this is his program and nobody else's, and it's always going to be for most of our lifetimes at the very least. And so there is a tug of war that you can picture without even going into further detail. You could unpack a lot more as far as a potential decision, but Kentucky, as of right now, still has John Calipari as head coach, but it could just be a contractual thing at this point. So that's where we are at this stage. It looks like Scott Drew is going to be a main guy in the mix. And what are your thoughts as we sit here and talk about another potential shakeup when it comes to not I guess it is still potential in the college basketball world, but of course, the direct connection to what's happening here in Waco with Scott Drew and his basketball program.
Right. So you mentioned Matt Jones, Kentucky Sports Radio. He mentioned that Calipari still hasn't informed Kentucky that he's resigning. This was as of an hour ago. Until then, Kentucky officially can't reach out to coaches. We know how that process works, though.
They're talking to agents.
Yes, exactly. It's all going through agents. But the same guy mentioned Danny Hurley, Billy Donovan, Scott Drew. Those are like the three that everyone's kind of settled in on as, okay, those are the three that they're going to contact first and really try to land and then move on from there. That's why I feel like it's kind of funny that, Nate Oates put that out there, because I don't think he was offered the job or anything like that at the moment that he sent that out. Do I think he probably got an extension from it? Yeah, potentially, or some sort of money raise of some kind. Yeah, to make sure he stays. I think Bruce Pearl is kind of in that same boat. Based on kind of what I've heard or gathered so far. But as far as Scott Drew goes, I mean, this was always the job that I think most people would have been most afraid of for him to leave. And the reason for that is because you look at Duke, you look at North Carolina, they always hire from within. They're not going to go outside and hire someone, whereas Kentucky is perfectly fine with that. They do it all the time. They hire guys. They just hire the best coach they can possibly get, and they've done that for multiple coaching searches. And so that's where you kind of look at it as a potential blue blood spot for Scott Drew. But I think in general, it's still that same thing, right? It's, do you want to go to Kentucky and just build on the blue blood that Kentucky already is? Or do you want to stay at Baylor and push Baylor into that conversation of being a blue blood, kind of like Jay Wright did at Villanova, kind of like we've seen? I know UConn's had multiple coaches, and UConn's been great for, 25 years, but still something like that where you officially get treated as a blue blood. Scott Drew's trying to build that at Baylor. And so the question is does that matter more? Or does the possibility of, maybe it's easier to win championships, or maybe it's easier to have the money and the fundraising and the support from the fans at Kentucky? I understand all that, and I understand why that's appealing. But at the end of the day, I don't know if that's going to be enough to overcome the fact that, he built Baylor basketball to what it is today. And for that reason, I still find it hard for him to, I would find it hard for him to leave. And I don't know that I would believe it if anyone said he's for sure leaving today. It would be pretty crazy to think about, but Kentucky is an elite job. So you got to take that into consideration.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly the obvious appeal of staying where you are and being the man where you are, and where you literally built this program out of dust and nothingness based on where it was when you were hired to take this job originally. I mean, as low of a low point as you could reach in this college sports landscape is what Baylor basketball was facing after the Patrick Dennehy situation, and just the horror of all that. And to think that somebody came in and did what they did, it's well documented. It's in multiple documentaries at this point. The story has been told. It's been told in books, including Scott Drew's own book. It's well documented, the miracle job that he did, and many still call it the greatest makeover job in sports history. I mean, there's plenty of people that are not Baylor fans that believe that about what Scott Drew did with Baylor basketball. And so, yes, there is always that special connection. There always will be that special connection. But is that enough still at this point to keep you here for another 10, 20 years, whatever it may be? Do you want this to be your only stop and the place where, yes, I've seen the arguments, they're building a statue of you regardless, but there is a big difference in it. And I don't know if that statue comes around in the next 5 years like it probably would, certainly within the next 10, or if you're talking about like 25 years after now, it's like, yeah, we'll finally honor Scott Drew because, he left for Kentucky all those years ago, but now like he's retiring, so let's honor him, It
might delay it.
Oh, it would definitely delay it, because you're not going to honor a guy, just shortly after he leaves you for another program. And so, yes, he will always have his fingerprints all over this Baylor basketball machine. He will always be the guy, but there is something to be said for finishing that story and then going and starting a brand new story elsewhere. And so that's, I'm sure, part of what he's weighing. I'm sure there's a number of other factors that we're aware of, like, living situation or recruiting or money or just all like the 100 things that probably cross your mind or your agent's mind or your wife's mind or your family's mind or whoever that will be involved in this decision. And, when Louisville was the scuttlebutt, I never bought into that. And the only thing that I even considered, and I said it on this show multiple times, is like, if he just wants to do something different, then that would be why he would go take the Louisville job. There was nothing else like just because you were good at points historically, that's not reason to go and take a job. Now, Kentucky's been the best, arguably, historically, and they've still got like the full arsenal at their bidding right now, whereas Louisville's in a little bit of a makeover situation. And Kentucky's just a better job, period, than Louisville is. But
don't tell Louisville fans that.
Well, it's true. So with Louisville, it's kind of like, I don't think that's really an upgrade. But with Kentucky, you have to be honest about it. And like, it's an upgrade. It's an upgrade over just about any job in America that's not like North Carolina, UConn, Duke, maybe. It might even be better. But I mean, it's right. Or Kansas. Or Kansas. I mean, it's pretty much those are the schools right now. And so you don't have to really jump through hoops to convince yourself of why he would do this. At the same time, though, there is that emotional attachment, that relationship with Baylor that is just so unique and so long-standing that it's a pull, but is it enough to keep him in the chair that he's been residing in for 2 decades now? I would like to believe so. I believe so as of right now, but I'm also realistic as where I didn't really consider Louisville too much of a threat. And like I said, like if he just decides like, hey, I just want to do something different, that's one thing. This one feels different though because of the job that we're talking about. And
this is a threat.
It's absolutely a threat. Louisville, it's very real.
I think we all kind of, again, you mentioned it, we all kind of agreed, like Louisville, it was more just kind of pushing this narrative that, Scott Drew would leave Louisville, and Louisville just saying, look at all the resources we have. But I don't think it was all that serious. This is different. I mean, this is a top 5 program in the country, and it always is going to be. And that's the hard part, right? Is just, getting past that and saying, okay, does going to a program like that mean more than building on the program that you're, trying to get to the mountaintop? Where are you at with that? And I know they won a national championship, so technically they've been there before, but I'm talking about in relation to all of the college basketball programs, not just one season, a new arena as well. I just think all signs point to Scott Drew being here for a lot longer, but this job is one that this was the one that I feel like I was always worried about, and I feel like most people were probably always worried about as well. He also has a good connection with Mitch Barnhart, who is the AD at Kentucky. So that's been another narrative that a lot of people have talked about, that they have a good relationship.
Yeah, I don't know who first pointed that out, but then it spread like wildfire that when they were in the bubble during COVID, various committee members were assigned basically to a team, and Mitch Barnhart was a part of that group and was assigned to be with Baylor basically. And I know that there's a particular name that it's escaping me right now, but he was a part of like the working group that was helping with the tournament and all that. And it was obviously a very unique situation because you were cooped up in a hotel for days on end. And we know that the just great relationship and the mix of talent that Baylor had, veterans and just NBA lottery picks, and just Scott Drew's being able to kind of keep that thing from bubbling over inside the bubble led to them winning a national championship. It was a very memorable experience because they won a natty, but also just the interactions that they had. It was very much a team-building, memorable type of thing, and Mitch Barnhart was a part of that for at least a little bit, staying in the hotel and apparently getting to know Scott Drew well, and they got along, and so something that maybe didn't seem like anything at the time and something I wasn't even aware of, like why, we didn't know about hanging out with Mitch Barnhart at the team hotel during the COVID bubble. But that's something that's now, been talked about as where their relationship kind of started or grew, and what led to now Mitch Barnhart potentially likely being interested in Scott Drew to become his next head coach. So there is a tie there. That's now been pointed out by pretty much everybody covering this story. I wish we gave credit to who first put that out there. But regardless, there is that connection. So, again, that's another layer of this isn't just, hey, the Kentucky job would be cool. It's like, oh, okay, well, he's got a relationship with Mitch Barnhart. Oh, okay, it is the top job in all of college basketball. And yes, he's got a new arena. And yes, Baylor basketball is well-funded, and the crowds are better than they have been with the new arena. But, I mean, let's just be honest with ourselves. I mean, I try to just cut through the BS sometimes, and it's Kentucky. I mean, enough said. It's Kentucky. All the things that he has here, he would have there, if not times two. And so this is a real threat that will, I guess, continue to just be monitored until there is some sort of a resolution. But there's no timetable because, again, as you pointed out, John Calipari has yet to make any move officially. Arkansas has yet to say anything. Kentucky's still got their reporters out there saying that, like, nothing's official either way. So until there's a move to kind of kick this ball down the road a little bit more, we're kind of in limbo just waiting to hear official something out of Lexington, Kentucky on John Calipari. And then they pivot to what I would imagine is already a conversation pretty far down the line with multiple candidates, including Scott Drew, and to where and what extent those conversations are at this point in time and with who, it's impossible for us to say. We're not in that circle, but certainly paying close attention to social media and just all the various reports out there, because this is something that is very real. And so I know there's a lot of feelings on the board right now. A lot of people, I think, realizing that, yes, Scott Drew is as loyal to Baylor as you could possibly be. This wouldn't be a disloyal move. This would just be, hey, man, we get it. But at the same time, wouldn't be easier of a pill to swallow. So obviously nobody wanting to see him leave, but understanding, the options that are maybe in front of him, and realizing that this is going to be a very important decision coming up here in the next few days for Scott Drew, for Kentucky basketball, and very much for Baylor basketball as well.
Yeah, and I expect it to move pretty quick. I think we're probably going to know this week what's going to happen there. I think there are going to be more names that get involved, especially if Scott Drew turns this job down. But I'm very curious kind of how this plays out. If Scott releases something, whether it's, he's staying, or, if it just becomes he's going to be the guy, it's going to be fascinating. And I know all Baylor fans are going to be just, patiently waiting, I guess. Impatiently waiting is probably the better word. I will say, though, it's rather interesting. Kentucky fans don't seem all that excited about Scott Drew. So I just want to throw that out there. Everything I've seen from Kentucky fans on Twitter, and even people who follow, the team, they just don't seem very excited about him. Don't think he has the personality for Kentucky. They'd prefer someone like a Bruce Pearl or a Billy Donovan or a Danny Hurley or, Nate Oates. So I just feel like that's rather interesting as well, that the fans aren't excited when it is pretty clear that Scott Drew is a top 5 coach in the country.
Yeah, I just think that maybe it's his style that doesn't vibe. I don't know. Maybe he's too nice. Maybe for some Kentucky fans, I don't know why they would push back on Scott Drew, except for just like, you'd rather have Billy Donovan, or you'd rather have Danny Hurley, the guy who just won another national title last night, or I guess the couple of other names that are thrown out there that are obviously big name guys. But yeah, it's a very short list until you get to Scott Drew. But you're right, there has been a vocal element. I also know that's a massive fan base, so there's always going to be a segment that's not going to be totally on board. And it's also social media, so what sounds like it's about 500 people is actually 5 people tweeting 100 times each. So I wonder how much of that is also the case with those who would be anti-Drew. But, that's also not enough reason for him to not take the job. All the other stuff I think trumps that. So this is going to boil down to, I don't think it's going to be about facilities or about dollar figures. It's going to be about what his desire is for the rest of his career. Does he want to take on the challenge of Kentucky? Does he want to go slip on those shoes and be a part of that program's history? Or does he want to choose to finish the story that he started at Baylor, and that is his story? And I know he'd be the first to say, it's not just my story, it's all my, but you know what I'm saying. It's his story, and he's the man at Baylor. Like I saw Kendall Kaut arguing not arguing like fighting, but, debating. He's going to have his statue. It's just a matter of if it's in the next few years or in 15, 20 years, as we said at the start of the show. So, yeah, he's still going to always be honored by Baylor, but to the extent that he would be is going to be heavily dependent on what decision is made here in the next few days, whether it's a decision in his control or out of his control, depending on what Kentucky does. So it's not a story that you were hoping for. You were hoping that basketball season was just going to end. You start talking about VJ Edgecombe and all these great players that he's got coming in. But instead, here we are with this coaching search seemingly out of nowhere thanks to the Arkansas Razorbacks. So thanks, Piggies, for getting this all stirred up and getting us having this conversation as opposed to spring football. But it's interesting. I mean, just from a 1,000-foot view, I'm interested to see what happens just from a college basketball standpoint, because Scott Drew going to Kentucky would be a huge wave. But selfishly, yeah, I want him to stick around here and finish what he started and build on what he started, especially with a new arena. And I know that people are going to point out all the things that he's got, but while I get that, a new arena is not going to be the decision in whether or not he goes to Kentucky and takes that job or not.
I think it's more just about the idea that he has the resources now at Baylor to compete, right?
Sure.
Not so much that, he has the arena, so now it's a done deal.
If he didn't, we'd be like, okay, shoot.
He's leaving.
Yeah, right. It's definitely, it helps them, but it's not going to be a deciding factor.
Correct. Yeah. And I also think, it's important to note, if he does leave, then you start looking at the roster, because we've seen, when coaches leave, things start happening, classes start falling apart because guys can transfer immediately. So that would be another very not great storyline. And then, of course, we'd got to start talking about, who would be the next coach. But before we get there, got to figure out what's going to happen with Scott Drew in Kentucky. But it's definitely a very interesting time period and something that we're going to be monitoring very closely.
Yeah, I mean, by the time you listen to this, if you're listening later in the week, this is probably already decided.
Yeah.
So can't do anything about the timing of all this. It's just the way that it's worked out. So don't know how outdated this portion of the podcast will be, but it is the biggest news going on right now. So until Kentucky announces something or Arkansas announces something officially, we are monitoring the situation and we will see what happens. But yes, there are other topics that we could go off on a tangent on, like the roster, but there's just absolutely no point in doing that right now until we know something officially. But you would think that yes, there are a lot of familiar old Drew staffers that would make sense that are off taking other jobs. Like if you're thinking about, okay, if you were to take the Kentucky job, like would have been nice to know this before John Jacobs left. Would have been nice to know this before Jerome Tang signed an extension with Kansas State. But it is what it is as far as the timing goes. And yes, there would be roster fallout. There's no doubt about that. So we'll see how deep into the weeds we need to get on that conversation. But we'll have an idea here, hopefully sooner rather than later, because I don't think it's good for anybody, and I don't think Kentucky fans have the blood pressure to let this drag out beyond the next couple of days, you would think. So
yeah, and just a quick note here also, early odds for the national championship, Baylor is 7th for men's basketball, and just ahead of them, number 6 is Kentucky.
There you go, yeah.
Pretty interesting, just kind of note there. But yeah, national championship odds, they kind of appear to me at least to think that Scott Drew's going to stay at Baylor, but that's probably before the news came, right?
Yeah, it's also all they have to work on. So when they're putting it together, I don't think they can really take into account, well, what if this happens?
What if he leaves?
Because they'll just put out a new graphic when whatever happens, happens. So, yeah, I don't think that is telling in any way, shape, or form. But that's where we are. So the Kentucky job in limbo right now, and that will have a direct effect on the happenings in Waco to one extent or another. And I did see where there's the quite, echoed comment of, well, if he turns down Kentucky, if he even gets offered the job, we don't know the situation right now exactly, but then that would lead you to think that that's just it. Like there's no other job he would take. But I still, North Carolina, Kansas, like those are those upper level jobs that you never say never. But yeah, it would pretty much shut the door on like, sorry, any Louisville level school or, whoever, it would be much harder to believe the Scott Drew's leaving rumors if he were to get past the Kentucky wave of job openings.
I think realignment would be something that could influence that. But again, like North Carolina, they hire from within. Not every time, but for the most part, same with Duke. And so, this would be a huge hurdle to jump across for sure. Because like I said, Kentucky was the blue blood that I was most afraid of as far as what school could Scott Drew ultimately leave for. Kentucky was one that kind of made sense.
Yeah, it's one of less than a handful of jobs that make all of the sense for him to take. So that's why it's a real threat, and that's why we are sitting here wondering as much as you are what's going to happen. And I'm very curious, like if we have to have the conversation about, a head coaching opening, This just crossed my mind. I don't want to get too into it because it may be a pointless conversation, but, like, do you bring back a Drew guy? I mean, what kind of a bad taste is left in your mouth that, like, you really want to relive it with somebody else, off that branch? Yeah. But that's for conversation potentially.
Lots of successful guys, though. Lots of options you do go that route.
There is, but there's also the opportunity to start and go a brand new direction. So hopefully that's not a conversation we have to have. But that is a conversation that's sitting there brewing, potentially, depending on what happens. So there you have it. There's men's basketball and the latest on Scott Drew. Meanwhile, spring football is continuing on, and they're going to have practice later on today, although it's quite stormy outside. The indoor, probably where we'll find them here in a few hours, but now pretty much 2/3 of the way through spring drills, a couple of weeks to go, and then the spring game, not this Saturday, but next. We'll close out the festivities and the 15 practices. Been kind of quiet. I mean, there's been media sessions here and there, but I just get a different vibe about spring ball as far as, like, newsy, kind of, I guess, people chewing on things. I feel like the program's at a point where it's almost impossible for people to get super excited about spring ball because of recent results. And so it's a matter of, like, show me, don't tell me, kind of in the air right now. But they're busy at work, and I've found some of the things that have been going on pretty interesting. Enjoyed listening to Dave Aranda the other day. I know some people now at this point just kind of tune out, or they want to see it, not hear it. But I thought he had some, interesting comments just to kind of update everybody of where things are. For one, Kurt Daniker, offensive line transfer. We got word from Aranda after the scuttlebutt was out there about him having suffered an injury early in camp. Aranda confirmed that he suffered a knee injury, and he's working out to the side. I know that you saw him, I guess, this past weekend. He's not, like, out as far as, like, they've ruled him out for next year or anything crazy like that. So that's the good news for right now, but also don't really know the full extent other than he's trying to work his way back before spring ends. But we're also less than 2 weeks out from that happening. So Aranda said if he does come back, it might be later, which could be like next week, and he practices like twice, and then that's it. So you're either way not going to get a whole lot out of Kurt Daniker this spring, unfortunately. He's also, however, a guy who's played a lot of football, so I don't know how much he needs a full spring, but it would be nice to have him out there with new teammates and new coaches and new scheme and new surroundings and getting adapted to all of that rather than doing it in fall camp. So he's been able to get some of that, but the on-field work has not been a part of the equation for him. So how did you, feel about just the way he discussed Daniker? Was you optimistic update or just in the middle for you?
I mean, it was kind of what I kind of alluded to this last week, because that's when I kind of heard that this was ultimately what was going on, because Daniker had missed practice every single week since the first week. So he was injured the first week of spring camp. And so from that point on, he hadn't been out there, and now he's considered day-to-day. Kind of what I thought was going to happen here was that he wasn't going to practice the rest of spring and then just, get ready for the summer and the fall. That was my expectation. So I assume that, based on what he said, it's a little more optimistic than where I was at. If you're saying, he could get back by the end of spring, okay, well, that gives him a shot. I will say, he has been running. He has been doing various things on the side, as far as just kind of trying to get back to where he can put on full pads and have full contact again. So it's not something where I'm sitting here going, okay, he might miss the whole year. Like that's not what this is going to be. But it is clearly something to keep an eye on, and something that, it's worth noting for a guy that's a veteran and has been around for a long time, played a lot of football. You don't know what kind of that wear and tear has been over the years. And so to see him not healthy this early in camp and then missing this much of camp, it's definitely a caution flag.
Meanwhile, the quarterback competition continues on, and I know there are some that are wondering why DeQuan Finn hasn't already been named the starter or feel like there's not really much of a competition to be had. I would disagree with that wholeheartedly. I do think that he's the favorite, but I don't think it's obviously a given. And I also think, why is there this rush to name a starting quarterback like by the end of the first week or the second week or the third week of spring? Like, let's see where we are after the green and gold game, for one, because that's typically when you would announce if you had a starting quarterback. It doesn't make much sense to do it right in the middle of the competition for quarterback, even if there is a heavy favorite. So Sawyer Robertson's competing. RJ Martinez is, involved as well and doing some good things. They clearly like him, but there's just parts of his game that aren't quite up to snuff just yet. But that's the case for each guy. They have their own strengths and weaknesses. But I do see people kind of getting nervous about DeQuan Finn and why he's not just the man already. But your thoughts on just the fact that there's a competition ongoing, and are you surprised by that at this point?
I mean, currently, DeQuan Finn's just getting outplayed right now by Sawyer Robertson, and it's early. It's camp, and also I will mention, there has not been this emphasis on using him as a runner currently, and that's his biggest strength. I mean, he's very, very fast. He's very elusive, and so for those reasons, it does hold him back a little bit. But as far as what they're being asked to do in the pocket and, making throws, making plays from the pocket, Sawyer Robertson has just been better, just a little bit better so far through camp. We'll see if that changes, but I think it's important to mention last year, we talked about this ad nauseum. It was going to be really hard for Sawyer Robertson to win the job over Blake Shapen because he was adjusting to a new offense and a new scheme. Fast forward to this spring, and Sawyer Robertson is used to this scheme because of what he did at Mississippi State, and Finn is used to it as well, but not to the same degree, in my opinion, as Sawyer. And so that's kind of what we're seeing right now. Is Sawyer's just being really effective and playing really good football, and it's pushing DeQuan Finn, and I think ultimately that's a good thing. I think ultimately DeQuan Finn, will be the starting quarterback for Baylor. But I do think it's very intriguing that he's getting pushed this much this early. And I mentioned this on the board. I'm curious your thoughts on it. If DeQuan Finn does not win the starting quarterback job, if he's not the starting quarterback for Baylor the first game of the year, if he's fully healthy, that's a huge miss for Baylor. I mean, you don't go around and try to find a high-level quarterback and use NIL to, on a specific position and then not start that guy. That is really, really difficult, and I would consider that a miss. And I know people push back and say, well, you need two quarterbacks. Okay, but I think you could have found an option that maybe wasn't as high-end as DeQuan Finn, and then you could have addressed another position with a high-end talent using NIL. And so I think it's just an interesting conundrum that I've been thinking about. Again, I think ultimately Finn will be the starting quarterback, but if he's not, that's not great in my eyes.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Scott Drew thing where I'll worry about that when it happens rather than get too worked up over the idea that DeQuan Finn's not working out. But yeah, if that were to happen, I think, Sawyer Robertson commanded some NIL money. Now, probably not as much as DeQuan Finn, obviously, coming off of a MAC Player of the Year type of season in all the games that he's played. So Robertson got some NIL rub. So you're getting that regardless of who you go get at quarterback. But I see where you're coming from. I think it would depend, though. Is Sawyer Robertson, suddenly really good, and then you're just like, wow, it's just we were surprised by how good he ended up being. That would be a great problem, and you go, okay, well, they just didn't foresee that because Robertson made such a jump. And then I think that would take, obviously, some of the sting out of it. But, yeah, if Sawyer Robertson's just okay and he's beating out DeQuan Finn, who you clearly invested in, then, yeah, that would be very problematic. And that would be a waste of resources, so to speak, if you could have just had, just whoever come in, and Sawyer's obviously the guy. But I think the fact that they're both having to push each other is obviously a good thing here. And so good. Let DeQuan Finn sweat it out and not just have the job handed to him. I think that's what spring is for. So right now I think that's a good thing. But, yeah, if we get around to fall and Sawyer Robertson's the starter, then there's going to be some questions about how you could have better used your NIL situation potentially.
Right. I just think it's more about that specific allocation and things like that. But I think in general, Sawyer Robertson is taking steps forward, and that's a really good thing to see, that he has made strides. He had a good performance in the scrimmage over the weekend as well. A couple balls that he threw really well to Keytron Jackson, had a big play against Caden Jenkins, threw a touchdown to Hal Presley as well. So he made some really impressive plays and really continues to just be consistent. Finn being asked to stand in the pocket and make a lot of throws in the pocket, again, is not necessarily his game. It doesn't really open up what he can do as a runner. But, he's still got a ways to go, I think, before fall camp. And as of right now, I'm very interested to see if they do name a starting quarterback, because I think they should probably push this out into the fall, regardless of what happens, just based on the push that Robertson has given Finn at this moment.
Yeah, I don't know what Dave Aranda will decide to do there. He's still been plenty complimentary to DeQuan Finn, so not to make it sound like it's all ominous and that it's guaranteed that he's going to lose this competition. I still think he's the favorite. I still think he's in the lead. I think that he's not being given 100% of the reins. I think this is a confidence builder for Robertson. I think Robertson's improved or is just getting older with more experience after last year and improving his game as a result of all that. So yeah, I don't view it as a bad situation at all right now. It would make you scratch your head if game one rolls around, they're all healthy, and Sawyer Robertson's starting because, yeah, then you wasted, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars on a backup quarterback potentially. But as we've also seen, they're all going to play. I mean, based on Baylor's history over the last decade, they're both going to play.
Yeah.
And probably both start a game at some point or another. So, yeah, I guess cross that bridge when you get there. But I think the thing to take away is not, oh, my gosh, DeQuan Finn's not winning the job. It's, oh, shoot, Sawyer Robertson's pushing him a lot more than maybe we expected. That's how I'm taking it, at least.
Yeah, and that's how you should take it. Again, it's a moment where you're seeing that Sawyer is much more comfortable in an offense, and you're seeing him take that jump and rise to the occasion more so than DeQuan Finn's not playing well.
Yeah. And look, if he were to just jump up and grab the reins, that's actually, I mean, yeah, you eat some of your investment, but Sawyer's going to be around for more than just a year, you would hope. And so, yeah, you want it to work out where DeQuan Finn goes and grabs that job, but for the reasons that we mentioned, he's not fully unleashed. I mean, it's just still 2 weeks left to go in spring ball. They don't have to name a guy right this second, so why not let it play out some more? Let Sawyer continue to do his thing and let this race heat up and let them push each other. That's what the springtime is for competition, not naming a starter. So good to hear some positive things there. And Dave Aranda is still glowing. Like most, who stood out to you the last 2 weeks? DeQuan Finn was the name that he mentioned on the offensive side. It was the only name he mentioned on the offensive side, as a matter of fact. So he's still getting his compliments. It's just that Sawyer's also getting maybe more than people expected at this point as well. So there was the quarterback mention. He, talked about dabbling a little bit with coaching linebackers. It doesn't sound like he's thrilled about having to help out there because I think it's just such another time drain where he'd rather be focusing probably on other things, but it's sort of what he's called to do at the moment is to help out with the linebacker position. I guess it's specifically the inside linebackers.
Mike and Will.
Yeah, where Jamar Chaney has come on board. And just based on his answer, and it might have been because it was the end of the session, he was just like, he kind of danced around like, how much you enjoying? Because I just think it's such a time crunch for him. And he talked about how he can't really focus on the big picture things with the program as much as he was able to do because now he's got to be like in the dirt with the inside linebackers, like coaching like he was back at LSU basically. So that's clearly been an adjustment for him. I don't know how much he's loved being that spread out, but it's also just the position that he's in. So I think he understands that that's the way it's got to be until you go out and win enough to be able to just, okay, now you guys can take back most of these things. But right now he's got to be basically hands in dirt working to correct this thing.
Yeah, and I mean, that group has had major struggles since they lost Terrell Bernard in 2021. After that season, they just have not been the same, and athletically, they've had some real issues. And so bringing in JUCO linebacker Keaton Thomas, who literally came in and has been the starting Will linebacker since the moment he got on campus.
He shouted him out, yep.
Yeah, he's been a guy that's been really, really consistent and been playing right next to Matt Jones. And so hopefully he brings some athleticism and some playmaking to that position that they just haven't really had again since Bernard left and Dylan Doyle as well, when he left too. That definitely didn't help things. So, yeah, I mean, he's got to. That position's got to take a step forward, and they got a lot of young guys that need to develop.
They do. So those are just some of like the big picture things I think that came out from his session the other day. I had a write-up on it. I know that you had your insider notes that people can read as well from what you caught of practice, or I guess really what you heard from practice. But anything you want to pass along in terms of spring football here, I just kind of wanted to highlight some of the main talking points from Dave Aranda because everybody's going to have their own opinion on what they want to digest, but I know sometimes black and white can be boring, but black and white's black and white for a reason. It's just the facts. And so I like to pass those along. And I know you can speculate in other areas or, there's a lot of ways to look at things, but that's kind of the black and white of what's being talked about. more gray area or more black and white you want to bring to the table as far as just what you've heard or seen out of spring football right now?
Yeah, I think just coming off the scrimmage, I think receiving options, pass catching threats are trending up for Baylor. That's kind of the first takeaway that I got. When you got Keytron Jackson, Hal Presley, Michael Trigg, Jamal Bell, Cam Bonner, those guys all made pretty significant impacts in the scrimmage. And, one way or another, whether it was catching a touchdown, making a big play, or consistently making plays, those guys really stood out in this first scrimmage or second scrimmage. And Ashton Hawkins is another name to definitely keep an eye on. And that's without even mentioning Josh Cameron and Monterey Baldwin and Kelsey Johnson. I just think in general, they've revamped that group, and I think they're getting so many more reps and therefore getting much more comfortable in this offensive system. So that group definitely trending up. Defensive line versus offensive line. I think right now the defensive line is a few steps ahead of the offensive line. And that's not to say that the offensive line is doing bad. I think it's more so that there's a few guys that are doing really well in the offensive line, and then a few guys that are doing okay, and then there's just a drop-off of guys who just are still trying to figure things out. And so for that reason, the depth isn't quite there, especially with Kurt Daniker out. They've had to make some changes, shuffle some guys around, and ultimately that has led to them not consistently getting enough push against the Baylor defensive line. What does that mean, right? Because last year we talked about this and the defense line was winning against the offensive line. It just turned out the offensive line was terrible. So obviously we're taking into account that the offensive line maybe has taken at least a step forward in a new scheme. Maybe. We'll see on that. But I do think the defensive line has made some plays when you look at guys like Cooper Lange, Jackie Marshall, Trey Wilson, Brendan Bett, Tonga Lolohea. All those guys are performing well. And then the guy who actually made the biggest splash performance during the scrimmage was Kyan Roberts-Day. He had 2 sacks, made some plays against the run as well. And he's the guy who's got all the talent in the world, probably the most athletic defense lineman they have. It's either him or Jackie. And Kyan Roberts-Day made a huge impact. So I'm curious to see if this leads to him having a lot of success going forward this spring, or if it's just a situation where he continues to be good at pass rushing, but still not quite the complete every down player. We'll see on that, but it was really good to see that he's making an impact because he is a guy that definitely boosts the ceiling of the defensive line.
Yeah, Dave Arenda had some nice comments about Tonga Lolohea and just him coming around. And I had somebody ask in my write-up about a comment that I made about Lolohea getting constructive criticism. They basically do like call-ups, call-downs, I guess is what it's called, after certain practices. And the gist of that is that, a player will be called on and you, I guess in certain situations, you praise a teammate in front of everybody. You're like, hey, Jerry, been working really hard and we've taken notice or whatever, and you put a shine on them and the work that they're putting in. And then there's the opposite of that, like a call down where, it's not like mean, but it's, hey, like you're slacking off or we need to pick up the energy, or, hey, you're hurting us and holding us back. And it's not personal. It's just, it's constructive criticism in front of the team. And it's doing what families are supposed to do, which is, point out those types of things. And so it's nothing bad. It's nothing nefarious if you get in one of the call downs. It's just like your teammates telling you, like, hey, man, we need you to do a better job. And so apparently early on, he had been mentioned, I guess, in some of those settings as, I don't know, have specifics on it, but just like, just being encouraged or told like by teammates, like, hey, we need more, or we need better, or, whatever it was, effort, attitude, it doesn't really matter. It's just the gist of that's what it is. And so that's what was being referred to, was that I guess early on he got kind of called down, but that here as of late, he's now getting the opposite, and he's getting the call-ups where teammates are in that same setting commenting on the job that he's doing. And so that's a positive, that he's seemingly flipping a switch and is starting to get on track. And they're going to need him too. Like they can't afford to miss on any of the guys they have on the roster right now. He in particular is going to be a big part of what they do given the medical retirement. So it's good to hear that he's hopefully all the way on the other side of whatever was kind of holding him back, and he's now fully moving forward with this team.
Yeah, and I mean they're going to need him to be in the rotation. I mean, you're kind of hoping that he's not I don't think he's going to be the starter. I personally don't even know if he'll be a 2-deep guy, but he's definitely going to have to play and going to have to get in there and make an impact when he is in the game for however many reps that is. He's behind Cooper Lance. He's behind Brendan Bett, who's kind of rotating spots. So we'll see how many snaps those guys can, carry. But I do think Tonga is an important piece just for the size. I mean, just the sheer size that he brings to the table at 315 pounds. They don't have anyone else like that. And so, yeah, he's going to be very important. So pretty notable there. I think the only other spot that I really want to mention here is that I think that you're seeing, again, Baylor's. So I mentioned the wide receivers. I think Baylor's secondary is making strides, and I think they're going to be far better than they were a year ago. I think last year they were put in very tough situations just with the fact that the front seven wasn't stopping the run at all. And so therefore they're being asked to make these tackles that are pretty tough for a safety. I mean, just in general, they were being asked to do it far too often. And usually when you're the last guy to get beat, you're the guy that everyone points to. But in large part, you're usually like the third guy that has an opportunity to tackle the ball carrier. So I think in general, the safeties are coming along. I think the star position, when you look at Carl Williams and Kendrick Simpkins, I think they're going to be better there than they have each of the last 2 years since Jalen Petrie left. They got two guys with experience who I think are pretty talented as well. And you got Simpkins, who's a very good pass rusher. So those two guys I think are standing out there. Devin Bobby had an interception in the scrimmage, which was, I think, that's a positive to see a safety making a play on the football. And then the secondary, the cornerbacks, Caden Jenkins, he's a rock star, and now he's going to have to continue to live up to that every single day. And he got beat by Ketron Jackson on a play, but then they went right back at him, and he had a pass breakup in the end zone. So he's a guy that's going to be very important. I think in general, there's a lot of depth when you look at Tevin Williams, Reggie Bush, Chateau Reed, LeVar Thornton. They got a really nice group of cornerbacks as well. So I think in general, that group is coming together nicely, which they're definitely going to need because I do think that's the strong suit of the defense.
All right, anything else football-wise?
I think that's pretty much it. Recruiting, there's going to be an official visit at the end of the month, so we'll probably preview that in a couple weeks. But outside of that, just the normal. There's lots of visitors coming in. Baylor's still doing a really nice job with the top 15 recruiting class right now in 2025. So still quite a bit of momentum there as things continue throughout the spring.
All right, so spring football rolling on along, and quite newsworthy, although I do think spring football is kind of just general across the country taking a little bit of a step back as far as like high priority because of the transfer portal, because of coaching carousel stuff, because part right now March Madness is going on, and especially here, now all eyes are on Scott Drew as opposed to spring drills, but it's been very productive. I just don't feel like it's as like widely talked about, and I think that too has to do with like people don't want to see spring results. They want to see fall results.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of interesting things happening.
People
I've got
are
updates.
skeptical.
Yeah, I've got updates. Grayson's got them. And so if you're a part of the website and you want spring coverage, we've got plenty of that over there on Sikkim365.com. Meanwhile, need to get into the mailbag here, but I did want to mention, I guess, quickly, Baylor baseball now 13-18 on the year as we're weaving through and now approaching the midway point of April. But this past week, I guess I should say, had the 13-5 win over Houston Christian, and then had a couple of wins over Incarnate Word, 13-7 on Friday, 15-3 on Saturday, and then dropped the finale against Incarnate Word on Sunday, 14-1 in 8 innings. Woof there. But beyond that, it was a solid week overall. Got the series win, non-conference obviously with Incarnate Word. They did have a game scheduled for today or tonight at Baylor Ballpark. That's been washed out. That's been canceled against number 11 Dallas Baptist. So they're off until this Thursday where they will travel to Provo to take on BYU in a weekend series. So that's where they are currently. Again, I mentioned 13-18, and that's 5-7 now overall in conference play for the Bears. So that's got them still at the bottom quarter of the standings, just a game above BYU. So whoever wins that series, I guess if BYU won 2 games, they might end up tied. But either way, Baylor could separate if they could take 2 of 3 from BYU and get like a full 3-game lead on them. But it's also a jockeying for like 11th place. So, whatever there. But not far back. I mean, just a game or two back of everybody else. So it's a pretty tight race. There's not a great team, it appears, in Big 12 baseball this season. A couple of teams ranked. It's also Oklahoma and Texas. So it's like you don't really celebrate that knowing that they're not going to be here for much longer. So still a little bit of a ways to go, but overall a good week for Mitch Thompson and company and the BYU Cougars and their, I guess, first, conference trip to Provo up next, which is a beautiful setting for baseball.
Definitely, and BYU's coming off of a series win over Texas this past weekend. So, it's going to be an interesting test. This is another one where, what steps has Baylor baseball taken throughout the year? You're seeing improvements in the win-loss column as the season has progressed. Winning the series over Cincinnati and then winning one against Incarnate Word, that's great. But can you continue to stack those series wins? We'll see. We'll see. I think, not having to play Dallas Baptist is probably a good thing. That's a really, really good team. That's top 15 team. So getting to kind of continue that streak going into this BYU matchup over the weekend will be, I think, a good thing for Baylor. But, they're still 137 in RPI. This still isn't a good baseball team, but I think we're seeing at least improvements in the win-loss column, which is very important.
Meanwhile, softball, who really had a lot of high hopes rolling into this season, now 21-14 overall, 5-10 in Big 12 play, which is a bit of a surprise. Thought they'd maybe be a bit farther along than that at this stage, but they're coming off of a series loss to Texas Tech this past weekend, or series win, against Texas Tech this past weekend. Last week saw them lose to Texas State in the midweek tilt, then lost the opener at Getterman against the Red Raiders, but won the final two to take that, including an 11-3 win in 6 innings on Sunday. So they do beat the Red Raiders 2 out of 3, but it's a 2-2 week overall. They're scheduled to play down in San Antonio. I haven't seen any word on that game. I don't know what the weather's like down in the Alamo City, but wouldn't surprise me if that got rained out. I just don't know how big this storm we're in right now is, but certainly not a surprise that it's washed out in Waco. San Antonio, we'll see. They got Texas coming up this weekend, which would be a huge challenge for the softball squad, and that will be down in Waco for the first game, and then it'll turn to Austin on Saturday and Sunday. So unique there, but Texas, and I guess this would be the final matchup conference-wise, unless they play in the postseason tournament. But beyond that, this will be a last hurrah against the Longhorns. So that's where softball sits. Not terrible, not great, just kind of there. And right now in the standings, in the middle of the pack. At 5-10 overall, they're a game above Texas Tech, and BYU's there with 4 wins as well. Everybody's kind of got disjointed. I guess BYU Baylor, they played 15 games, and some others have played like 12 games, so it's a little bit off exactly on the separation there. But Oklahoma on top, no surprise. Oak State, Texas, those are the top 3 teams right now. Kansas also at 10 wins. Everybody else at 7 or less, and that's where Baylor finds itself.
Yeah, and Texas 31-6 on the season. They're a really good team. That's going to be a tough one for Baylor, but one that they really need to figure out a way to get some momentum here. They just started so poorly in Big 12 play. I think they were 1-8 to start Big 12 play, and when you start like that, it's just really difficult to bounce back. So hopefully they're able to go in and at least get 1, maybe 2 wins, maybe the series win over Texas. That would be really, really nice to give them at least some confidence as the second half of the schedule for them does lighten up compared to the first half.
Yes, so that's where they are. A little bit of a ways to go. Not great, not terrible, like I said, just kind of in the middle for both squads right now. Some moments kind of terrible, some moments pretty great, but where that all comes out on the other side, I think still remains to be seen for both. So there you go with that. Meanwhile, that about does it, I think, for all of the news and notes. I guess I should say congratulations as well to Davis Wenzel while we're talking baseball, former Baylor baseball standout who's a part of the Rangers organization, got called up due to injuries with the Rangers that are piling up. They just called up Justin Foscue. He gets hurt pretty much right away, so they need somebody else, and here comes Davis Wenzel getting the major league call, so that's got to be very cool for him, and certainly it's always a big deal for the program when you have somebody get that Major League Baseball call, so he has been added to the roster as of yesterday. and we'll see what he's able to do with that opportunity. But
yeah, and it's not very often that you see kind of Big 12 rivals replace each other, because he's replacing Josh Young as their top guy that he's replacing that got hurt, and then Foskey got hurt.
Young got hurt, and then Foskey came up, and then Foskey got hurt. So now it's like they've got to go to Davis Wenzel, basically. But hey, it's what it is.
And they played against each other when he was at Baylor and Tech. But Wenzel was such an awesome baseball player for Baylor, just a guy that I think he was on a couple teams that I felt like could have made a much deeper run had they just been able to avoid the injury bug, especially the Cody Bradford year when he got hurt. But happy for him. That's great. Hopefully he comes in, makes an impact, and just gets the recognition. And once, I feel like in baseball, once you see it, you're able to kind of make your way up to the major leagues a whole lot more. But a lot of times it just, you never get to see it. So he gets an opportunity to show it.
If anything, it'll be just a good learning experience to be around Corey Seager and Simeon and Scherzer and all these stars that the Rangers have. It'll be a great experience. But it should serve him well moving forward, you would think. So I wanted to shout out Davis Wenzel. Not sure how much action he'll actually see, but good odds we see him make his Major League debut. All right, to the mailbag, and let's be mindful of time here. We got a lot of questions. Doc Crowell, how disappointed are you in your Boilermakers, Grayson?
I mean, I mentioned it. It's more for my parents. This was a heck of a run, though, but not that disappointed. I mean, they made it to the national championship. This stuff happens. They played a really good team, and they lost, but they had a heck of a year and a heck of a run. And so while it's a disappointing finish, I think everyone can probably agree that was a very successful season for Purdue basketball.
Certainly. Great season. A lot to love about it. Didn't get to finish it how you wanted, but, Zach Edey will forever be a program legend. I'm kind of glad I don't have to watch him anymore, honestly. I mean, you can understand from another point of view of just he's such a bully down there. He's just so big that just felt so unfair at times, but he was a legend, and so they still had a lot to be excited about with this run this year and the last couple of years, really. Doc Crowell, from the reports on spring ball, do you think KRD is going to play? I guess they got knocked out early last year, huh? So maybe it's not as memorable. Was that 2 years ago?
First round. No, they lost Fairleigh Dickinson. Yeah,
so maybe the 2
upset.
years haven't been that great, but they've been pretty great.
Number one seed for Purdue is not commonplace, and making a national champion. I mean, last year was definitely more of a disappointing feeling.
Yeah,
right?
I was clarifying there because that was not a fun end yet last year. Doc Crowell, from the reports on spring ball, do you think Kyan Roberts-Day is going to play significant time this year?
I do. I think that he's just such a difference maker as a pass rusher. But the biggest thing for him, and I'm going to keep harping on this, is he's got to hold up against the run. And it's those other little nuances. If he can get those figured out, he's got a chance to push for, two deep and potential starting reps. I think he's that good, that explosive. But in general, in the role that he's in right now, he's going to play because he can get after the quarterback, unlike most guys on the defensive line. He's a difference maker there.
Doc also asks, who are the early enrollees already on campus? Any who are turning heads during spring ball? I think we kind of outlined this in probably a couple of different pieces, but it's been a few weeks, I guess. So do you want to run that down, and has anybody jumped out so far?
Right. So the early enrollees, I'll just name all of them just because it makes it a little bit easier. But Nate Bennett, Brock Jackson, Tonga Lolohea, Jaden Porter, Kylan Reed, Tristan Santoro, Colton Siraki, Keaton Thomas, and Chris Wokema. That's your early enrollees. There's only 5 guys that didn't early enroll. So those guys will arrive in June. But in general, the guys that I think have stood out the most, just from what I've seen, Jaden Porter doing a really nice job. I think that there's so much depth at wide receiver that I don't think he will burn his red shirt. But would it shock me if he did? No. I think he fits the offense really well. And if guys aren't performing, I could see him taking a role in the slot and potentially running with it. Aside from him, we mentioned Tonga Lolohea and Keaton Thomas, 2 JUCO guys that were brought in to play roles on this team. Keaton Thomas as a starter, Tonga definitely as a depth piece, a guy that you're hoping can play snaps for you when you need him at his size. Both have performed pretty well. I think they've lived up to what we expected from them coming in as a JUCO prospect. I think those are the main 3. The other guys, I've heard various things on, seen various things, but I don't think it's worth, saying too much on them. I think Nate Bennett would surprise some people. I think he's done a pretty nice job, and I think a lot of people were disappointed in who Baylor took as their quarterback commit, during the last cycle, but I think Nate Bennett has shown flashes at least of being a guy that's clearly a power 5 guy, or at least a group of 5 guy, a guy that's D1 that has the arm talent, can make the throws, and now you just hope he can develop him.
Billy 21, how many scholars are available for portals, the needs and order and possibilities, if any, transfers in? Thanks. It's kind of all over the place. I think you're talking about football, obviously.
The needs. Okay, so scholarships, that's just that. I don't really want to get into that. I think they have like 3 scholarships that I can point to as being available. But the thing of it is you bring in the guys this summer, you lose guys this cycle. It's just a complete guessing game. So I'm not going to dive into that too much, but I will tell you the needs that I look at when I look at the roster. Defensive line, offensive line are the 2 main ones. And then I would look at potentially maybe another wide receiver, maybe another safety, maybe another linebacker. That's kind of where my head goes. But offensive line, defensive line are the 2 areas that I think are the most important for them to address. I would take as many as I possibly could at those 2 spots.
Hopefully it answers your question, Billy, and that's something that when the spring ends and we have more roster clarity, we can dive further into some of those questions. But right now it's very set, but it could change dramatically after spring ball.
I can mention one thing. Indiana transfer, we mentioned him a while ago, Philip Bleedy, who transferred from Tech to Indiana. He canceled his potential visit with Baylor, so he's no longer going to visit. That's a portal update if you wanted one.
UWS Bear, are pets' heads falling off? This is a joke, no need to answer. Appreciate that. A little Dumb and Dumber reference, I guess. That we Dumb and Dumber, is that what you're trying to say? Oh, UWS Bear. Travis Roeder, a coach told me spring ball is about figuring out whether you have dudes on your team because you need at least a few to win big. For my limited exposure to this team, I'm pretty certain there isn't a Corey Coleman level dude on this roster, but do you think Baylor has any top level, first team, all Big 12 level guys this year? Drive safe in the weather today. Thank you, Travis.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. Man, first team all Big 12.
I say no off the top of my head. I think the first name, like as far as a star comes to mind, it's just because of all the attention he's got as a Caden Jenkins. But I also know like getting first team all Big 12 like corner honors is a lot easier said than done.
He's a dude though.
He's a dude. I mean, I'm mentioning him, but I'm just saying like that's also pretty dang good to get like first, all conference level honors, especially Corey Coleman level. I mean, Corey Coleman, even amongst the sea of freaks that they had on campus at that time, was like the freak of freaks in so many ways. Definitely nobody like him on campus right now. But, as far as potential guys, like Caden Jenkins pops to mind. There's not a lot of other guys, though, that pop to mind for me right off the top.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm going to continue this train because I think that he fits this bill. I do think that Keytron Jackson has the ability to be a dude. What level of dude? All Big 12 first team dude? Maybe not, but I think he can definitely be right on the fringe of that, especially in this offense that I think is going to be far more conducive to receivers putting up yardage and counting stats, which is what you need to make an all Big 12 team. So I think he's one that I would look at. I think, outside of that, I mean, you're really trying to guess. And I think like a guy like Michael Trigg has that ceiling, but he's never put on the field consistently. So can I say that he's a dude right now? No, but I will say, touchdown in the scrimmage, looks like a guy that's a freak, is getting open consistently. He could be a guy that fits into that role as well. Outside of that, I'm kind of looking at the defensive line. I mentioned Kyan Roberts-Day. I've mentioned Jackie Marshall multiple times. I really like Trey Wilson. There are some guys there that I look at that maybe they have the ceiling to get there, but I don't think we've seen enough to sit here and say, oh, yeah, that's a first-team guy or that's a guy that I know is going to make a massive impact. It's more so I know that these guys are good. Now let's see if they can take that next step.
Yeah, and Travis clarifying, he's not asking if there's a Corey Coleman, but like on that next level of all Big 12, I mean, that's the question we're answering. I think that's about as far as we get. So yeah, I don't think there's anybody who you can say with certainty like, that they're in that group, but there's almost a handful of guys you can say had that potential, but there's not an alpha male on this team unless they just have a massive breakout, like as far as like a dude.
I think Finn could be that.
Maybe,
but
yeah.
He's currently not that, but I think you unleash him as a runner, maybe he is that. So that's another guy that I think we probably should say. I mean, he's got that it factor, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if they had like a massive, renaissance on offense, they could see him get some all Big 12 type of honors, I suppose. But yeah, to answer the question, there's not a lot of options, and they're going to have to win with great coaching and great execution and just taking advantage of opportunities and not letting them, die on the vine. But yeah, they're not going to win with star power. To your point, to our point here, best week ever. Which position group do you think will exceed expectations?
I think that wide receiver. I think wide receiver is the group that's going to really change some people's minds. I think a lot of people are very down on that group after last year, as they should be. Really, the last 2 years, they have not been good enough. I think that group has a chance to exceed expectations. Maybe the defense line as well. That could be another one that I would look at.
Speaking of gut bear, O-line and D-line were a significant factor in how last season went, I suspect. How much realistic change should we expect after seeing some of spring for next season?
Oh, man. I think you should expect to see significant change. They were, offensive line-wise, they were horrible. One of the worst we've seen. And so for that reason, I think you should expect significant change there. And I think they will be far better than they were a year ago. Defense line, I think there's a lot of talent there. And we'll see on that, how much does that talent emerge? How much realistic? So, are you putting the offense line last year was the worst in the Big 12? Do I think they can get to the middle of the pack? Sure. Defense line was probably bottom half of the Big 12. Can they get to the middle pack of the Big 12? Sure. Do I think the offense line is going to be the best in the Big 12? No. Do I think the defense line is going to be the best in the Big 12? No. So it's somewhere kind of in there where I think they can go from really bad to being average, maybe a tick above average on the defense line.
Bare Knuckle, appreciate that question. I was thinking too about the Travis question. I could see where and I'm predicting him, but I could see if the offense really clicks the way at its best potential. Like a Richard Reese has a huge year, but I wouldn't consider him a all Big 12 candidate necessarily. But I can see where some guys get honors, but I don't necessarily see them on paper jumping out as the dudes. You know what I mean?
I think what we're kind of basing it on is if Baylor's really good, then this guy could be a reason why and could be it. So yeah, Richard Reese would fit that bill. Right now he's the guy at running back, which is nice to see after what happened last year.
Yeah, or Kelsey Johnson, but he's just not going to have a lot of offensive statistics, but just in a total package, he could be an all-conference type of player.
Maybe Daneker. Maybe Kurt Daneker if he gets healthy.
There's possibilities, but to Travis's question, there's not a line forming of dudes on this roster, but plenty of capable guys that maybe can ring up some awards if they have a great year as a team.
And Craig, we had one more question that we missed from Useless Kim Degree. It was, where does Baylor stack up in terms of resources and direction compared to UConn? What has UConn done that Baylor couldn't do following their national championship to follow up in such a dominant way?
Do you want to answer that? Because we're short on time here. I don't think that they've done a whole lot differently. I just think that it's one of the best programs in the entire country, and they've got a really great head coach, and just they're clicking on all cylinders. I think. Baylor obviously had a unique situation there with COVID and then losing guys in the NBA. Now, UConn's been able to do that and just not miss a beat. So I don't know if it's life in the Big 12 wears you down or if it's just UConn's that much better and they're just the top program in the country, which that's what they are. They won 2 national titles in a row. But I don't have anything specific on why they've been able to do that versus Baylor. Yeah,
UConn is the weirdest program because they've won all these national championships with 3 different head coaches, and they've had streaks where they've been really bad. They've missed the tournament multiple times recently, but then they sneak up and win a national championship. It's been a very weird thing. I think as far as resources and direction, I think Baylor is comparable. I think UConn's pretty squarely now a top 5 program when you look at resources and direction. I would think, there's some programs, maybe top 6, because those top 5 are pretty solidified. But I think Baylor's in that top 15 area.
I'd say top 15's fair, yeah.
I think that's pretty fair. I think UConn, when you look at Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, those schools have more resources. But I think UConn has great direction, and that's the biggest thing, I think, for them. And again, I think you mentioned it's just the the thing where how many guys do you bring back and how impactful are those guys that you bring back? That's why UConn was able to repeat. I mean, they brought it back a lot of guys, and they brought in a freshman that fit perfectly with all the other guys they had.
Yeah, they did lose some NBA guys, so they had to make up for that, but they did it masterfully. So, yeah, they're just clicking on all cylinders right now. I don't think it's an indictment, not that you were saying that it was, but, yeah, I don't know specifically why they're operating at such a high level right now other than just all the right ingredients at the right time, and they certainly seem to have that right now. And then we'll close it out with this. Bear in the Big Greenhouse, he posted a tweet, or she posted a tweet of Baylor assistant Aaron Appleberry had an AI image of a bear with a grill and said, "Happy Dia del Oso," a.k.a. Day of the Bear. Nothing would be better than getting a huge commit on Dia Day. And Bear in the Big Greenhouse was asking if this was a tease that there's a recruit that's close to popping, or was this just, wishful thinking, hopeful thinking?
I mean, I think there are recruits that are close to potentially popping. I think there's multiple guys that Baylor's doing a great job recruiting, but I don't think that was a specific thing. I think that was more about the, Dia del Oso being on that day and how cool that would be if they were able to do that. Obviously, it didn't happen. So, we'll see. But, yeah, I think in general it wasn't anything too specific, even though they are on a roll recruiting-wise.
Yeah, Dia del Oso was yesterday, so that came and went, but that should answer your question there. So, yeah, cool AI image. I'm still on the fence as far as all the AI stuff sometimes, but there's some cool ways to use it, and that was certainly one of them by Aaron Appleberry. So there you go. There's the mailbag this week. A lot of questions and a lot of you participating, and we certainly appreciate that. Speaking of which, if you want to participate even further, go subscribe to Sikkim365.com. Get all the latest scuttlebutt on Scott Drew and Kentucky and spring football and all the other things that are going on right now. But right now, we'd really appreciate it if you hit that like and subscribe button on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 YouTube page. You can also catch us on 365 Sports. Hit like and subscribe over there as well as we count down to 40,000 subscribers. So certainly would love for you to be a part of that process. And anything else before we go here?
No, nothing really. Just be sure to check out Sikkim 365 Premium if you have not. All kinds of information on spring football and, of course, Scott Drew decision and many other things. So be sure to check that out if you have not already.
And I would imagine that we will have an answer on the whole situation by the time we come back next week, but that's a few days away. So we'll see what this week brings us. Certainly, though, a lot of anticipation, a lot of nervousness, but hopefully a resolution not that far away. So until next time, thanks to Garrett Ross behind the scenes as well. And for Grayson Grundhoefer, I'm Craig Smoak. We'll talk to you next Tuesday at 11:15 on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 YouTube page or after the fact on your favorite podcast network. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.